The safe house was a nondescript flat in South London that Collins had arranged through her contacts in MI5. Thomas sat by the window, watching the street below while Dr. Thornton and Professor Hartwell worked at a kitchen table covered with photocopied documents and laptop computers. They had been hiding here for 3 days since the Oxford laboratory incident, trying to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered. Collins returned from another meeting with her superiors, and her expression told them the news wasn't good. "The investigation is being taken over by the security service," she announced. "My chief inspector says we're to hand over all evidence and cease any further research activities." Dr. Thornton looked up from her genealogical charts with alarm. "They want to bury this, don't they?" "The official position is that this is now a matter of national security requiring specialized handling," Collins replied carefully. "Unofficially, I think you're right. Too many powerful people have too much to lose if this information becomes public." Thomas had been expecting this development, but it still frustrated him. What about the people who broke into the palace? What about heritage investigations and whoever is behind them? Collins sat down heavily in the remaining chair. "That's the interesting part. My contacts tell me that heritage investigations was a front operation, but they're not sure who was running it. The investigation has uncovered financial connections to at least 3 different intelligence services, British, American, and one they won't identify." Professor Hartwell stopped typing on his laptop. "Multiple intelligence agencies? Why would foreign services be interested in medieval British documents?" "Because modern politics isn't just about current events," Collins explained. "The British monarchy is symbolic head of the Commonwealth, which includes some of the world's most strategic nations. If you could prove the royal family's illegitimate claim to the throne, you could potentially destabilize governments from Canada to Australia." Thomas realized the implications went far beyond British domestic politics. "So we're caught in the middle of some kind of international intelligence operation?" "It appears so," Collins confirmed. "Which means we're all in considerably more danger than I initially thought." Dr. Thornton had been reading through her notes while they talked. "I think I know why this has become such a high-priority operation. Look at these dates." She spread out a timeline she had constructed showing major royal events over the next 18 months. The monarch's upcoming state visit to America was highlighted in red, along with the Commonwealth Conference scheduled for the following year. Both of these events involve critical negotiations about trade agreements, military alliances, and constitutional relationships with Commonwealth nations, Dr. Thornton explained. If doubts about royal legitimacy surfaced before these meetings, Professor Hartwell understood immediately. The monarchy's authority to represent British interests internationally could be challenged. Treaties signed by an illegitimate monarch might be subject to legal disputes. Collins nodded grimly. "Exactly. Someone wants to weaponize these historical documents for contemporary political purposes. The question is whether they're trying to expose the truth or create a false scandal using fabricated evidence." Thomas had been thinking about the missing documents Professor Hartwell had identified. "We still don't know if the complete collection would support or contradict what we've found. Maybe the missing pieces contain evidence that would exonerate Ethred rather than condemn him. Or maybe they contain evidence that would make the current revelations seem insignificant by comparison," Dr. Thornton replied darkly. Professor Hartwell had been conducting additional research using the university's digital archives. "I found something interesting. There are references in 12th century chronicles to a Saxon noble who provided crucial intelligence to Norman forces. But the chronicles refer to him by a different name, Ethred the Truthseer." Dr. Thornton looked puzzled. "Truthseer? That's an odd title for a traitor." "That's what I thought," Hartwell continued. "But medieval chroniclers often used euphemistic language when writing about controversial figures. What if Ethred wasn't just a collaborator seeking personal gain? What if he believed he was preventing a greater catastrophe?" Thomas leaned forward with interest. "You mean he might have thought cooperation with the Normans was the only way to save Saxon lives?" "It's possible," Hartwell replied. "The historical record shows that Saxon resistance to Norman rule continued for decades after the conquest. Brutal suppression campaigns killed thousands of civilians. If Ethred had information suggesting that organized resistance was hopeless, his cooperation might have been an attempt to minimize bloodshed." Dr. Thornton was studying her genealogical charts with new perspective. That would explain why his descendants were so thoroughly integrated into Norman society. They weren't just being rewarded for treachery. They were being protected because Ethred's actions had served the broader cause of peace. Collins's phone rang, interrupting their discussion. She answered tersely and listened for several minutes before hanging up with obvious concern. "We have a problem," she announced. "Someone calling himself Dr. Richard Ashworth contacted the Times newspaper this morning. He claims to represent American genealogists who have discovered evidence of fraud in the royal family tree. He's offering to provide documentation proving that the monarchy's bloodline claims are false." Thomas felt his blood run cold. They're going to release fabricated evidence to create a scandal. "It gets worse," Collins continued. "The caller specifically mentioned finding documents in a Saxon nobleman's hidden chamber. He knows about our discovery." Dr. Thornton gathered up her papers protectively. "If they publish false documents based on our genuine discovery, it will be impossible to separate truth from fiction in the public mind. The real history will be lost forever." Professor Hartwell was already reaching for his phone. "I have contacts at the Times. Maybe I can warn them that they're being manipulated by foreign intelligence operations." But Collins shook her head. "It's too late for that. My superiors have decided to implement emergency media restrictions under the Official Secrets Act. Any publication attempting to print stories about royal genealogy will face immediate government intervention." Thomas understood the government's dilemma. They couldn't allow false information to damage the monarchy, but suppressing the story would create conspiracy theories that might be even more damaging in the long run. "So what happens to the real documents?" he asked. "Do they just disappear into some classified vault forever?" Dr. Thornton looked determined. "Not if I can help it. I've spent my career studying royal history, and I won't let political considerations override historical truth." Collins warned her to be careful. "Margaret, you're under official surveillance now. Any attempt to contact journalists or publish information about this discovery will result in serious criminal charges." "Then, we need to find another way to protect the truth," Dr. Thornton replied. Professor Hartwell had an idea. "What if we could locate the missing documents before Heritage Investigations uses them for their false flag operation? If we could prove the complete historical picture, it might neutralize their ability to manipulate the evidence." Thomas liked this approach. "Do we have any leads on where the missing documents might be?" Dr. Thornton had been thinking about this question for days. "Actually, we might. I found references in 17th-century palace records to a second hidden chamber, discovered during renovations, but then sealed up again on orders from Charles II. Collins was immediately interested. Why would Charles II order a historical chamber to be resealed? Because he was paranoid about anything that might threaten royal legitimacy, Dr. Thornton explained. The English Civil War had just ended. His father had been executed by Republicans, and he was obsessed with eliminating any evidence that could be used against the monarchy. Professor Hartwell was accessing architectural databases on his laptop. If there's a second chamber, it would most likely be connected to the first one we discovered. Medieval builders often created multiple hiding places linked by secret passages. Thomas realized they might have missed something during their initial exploration. "We were so focused on the stone chest that we didn't thoroughly examine the walls of the chamber. There could be another hidden entrance we didn't notice." Collins looked conflicted. "Even if that's true, I can't authorize another unauthorized expedition into the palace basement. The site is now under official government control." But Dr. Thornton had that determined look that Thomas was beginning to recognize. "Thomas, you still have your palace access, don't you? Your security clearance hasn't been revoked yet." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding what she was suggesting. "You want me to go back down there alone?" "Not alone," Dr. Thornton corrected. "With me. I know what to look for, and you know how to navigate palace security systems." Collins stood up abruptly. "Absolutely not. I can't be party to breaking into a crime scene that's under government control. If you're caught, it will destroy any credibility we have left." Professor Hartwell disagreed. "Sarah, if we don't act soon, the false documents will be published and the truth will be lost forever. Sometimes protecting the greater good requires taking calculated risks." Thomas found himself facing the biggest decision of his career. He could follow orders, turn over the evidence to his superiors, and return to his normal duties as if none of this had ever happened. Or he could risk everything to uncover the complete truth about a historical mystery that could change how the world viewed the British monarchy. He thought about his 12 years of faithful service, his oath to protect the royal family, and his deep respect for the institution he had served. But he also thought about the importance of truth, the danger of allowing false information to destroy legitimate historical understanding, and his responsibility to future generations who deserve to know their real history. "When do we go?" he asked Dr. Thornton. Collins looked at him with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Thomas, you're throwing away your career for a bunch of medieval documents." "No," Thomas replied quietly. "I'm protecting the crown from people who want to destroy it with lies. Sometimes the best way to serve your country is to discover the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable." Dr. Thornton was already gathering the equipment they would need for another exploration. "The palace will be least secure during the shift change at midnight. If we're careful and move quickly, we can be in and out before anyone realizes we were there." Professor Hartwell promised to continue analyzing the documents they had already found, looking for additional clues about the missing pieces. Collins, despite her official reluctance, agreed to monitor police communications and warn them if their activities were discovered. As evening approached, Thomas prepared for what might be his final mission as a royal guard. Whatever they found in that hidden chamber would determine not just his own future, but possibly the future of the monarchy itself. The ancient key felt familiar in his pocket now, a tangible link to secrets that had waited nearly 1,000 years to be revealed. Soon, he would follow that link wherever it led, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had worked for in his life. The truth was worth that risk. He only hoped they would survive long enough to share it with the world. Dr. Thornton insisted on conducting the document authentication process in absolute secrecy. She had arranged to use the private laboratory at Oxford University, where her former colleague Professor James Hartwell specialized in medieval manuscript analysis. The three of them drove to Oxford that same afternoon, with the precious documents sealed in climate-controlled containers. Thomas had never been inside a university research facility before. The laboratory was filled with sophisticated equipment, microscopes, spectrometers, carbon dating apparatus, and computer systems that could analyze handwriting and ink composition down to the molecular level. Professor Hartwell was a thin man in his 60s with the eager enthusiasm of someone who had spent his life studying ancient texts. When Dr. Thornton explained what they had discovered, his eyes lit up with scholarly excitement that quickly turned to concern as he grasped the implications. "If these documents are genuine," he said after his initial examination, "they represent the most significant historical discovery in British history since the Doomsday Book. But, Margaret, you understand what this could mean for the country." Dr. Thornton nodded grimly. "That's why we need absolute proof of their authenticity before we decide how to proceed. Can you give us a preliminary assessment?" Professor Hartwell worked through the night, using every tool at his disposal to examine the parchments, inks, and seals. Thomas and Collins took turns sleeping in the laboratory's break room while Dr. Thornton assisted with the analysis. By morning, Professor Hartwell had reached his conclusions. "The materials are definitely authentic to the period," he announced. "The parchment, ink composition, and aging patterns all match what we would expect from 11th century documents. The handwriting styles are consistent with Norman court scribes of the era." Collins leaned forward in her chair. "But are the documents themselves legitimate? Could they be period forgeries?" "That's the remarkable thing," Hartwell replied. "The seals are genuine. I've compared them with known examples in the British Museum and the National Archives. These appear to be authentic legal documents issued by William the Conqueror's administration." Thomas felt his stomach drop. He had been hoping the documents would prove to be elaborate fakes, allowing them to close the case and return to normal life. Instead, they were looking at evidence that could destroy the monarchy's legitimacy. Dr. Thornton spread out genealogical charts she had been working on all night. "I've traced Ethelred's bloodline through 9 centuries of British nobility. The connections are undeniable. His descendants include the Earls of Pembroke, the Dukes of Somerset, and eventually marry into the royal bloodline during the Tudor period." She pointed to a complex family tree that showed how Ethelred's treachery had been rewarded with titles and lands that eventually connected to the current royal family through multiple marriage alliances over the centuries. The current monarch is directly descended from a man who betrayed his own people and caused the deaths of thousands of Saxon nobles, Dr. Thornton concluded. The entire basis of royal legitimacy, the idea that they rule by divine right and noble bloodline, could be called into question. Professor Hartwell looked troubled. Margaret, we need to consider the broader implications. These documents don't just threaten the royal family. They could destabilize the entire British constitutional system. Parliament, the Church of England, even the Commonwealth nations could face legitimacy crises. Thomas had been quiet during most of the technical discussion, but now he spoke up. What about the people who broke into the palace? They obviously knew about these documents. How did they find out? Collins had been wondering the same thing. That's a good question. Either someone else found references to this chamber in historical records, or there's been a leak from someone with access to palace archives. Dr. Thornton looked uncomfortable. Actually, there might be another explanation. I wasn't completely forthcoming yesterday about my research into this matter. Thomas and Collins both turned to stare at her. What do you mean? Collins asked sharply. 3 weeks ago, I received an inquiry from a private research firm called Heritage Investigations Limited. They claimed to be working on behalf of a client researching Saxon noble bloodlines. They asked specifically about any records relating to Ethelred the Bold and potential hiding places for documents in royal properties. Collins was immediately alert. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because I told them I had no such information, Dr. Thornton replied defensively. I gave them a standard response that palace historical records don't contain detailed information about pre-Norman nobility. But now I realize they may have been fishing for information. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. Dr. Thornton, those people broke into the palace. They could have endangered the royal family, palace staff, everyone who works there. You should have told us about this immediately. I understand you're upset, Dr. Thornton said quietly. But you have to understand, I receive dozens of research inquiries every month. Most are legitimate historians or genealogists. I had no way of knowing this one was connected to criminal activity. Collins was already on her phone, calling her contacts at Scotland Yard to run a background check on Heritage Investigations Limited. While she waited for information, she questioned Dr. Thornton about every detail of her interaction with the research firm. The company had contacted her through official channels, with proper letterhead and professional correspondence. The person she spoke with identified himself as Dr. Richard Ashworth, claiming to represent a wealthy American client interested in documenting Saxon noble ancestry. He seemed knowledgeable about historical research methods, Dr. Thornton explained. He asked intelligent questions and didn't pressure me for information. It felt like a routine academic inquiry. Collins finished her phone call with a grim expression. Heritage Investigations Limited doesn't exist. The address they used is a mail forwarding service in London, and the phone number is disconnected. Dr. Richard Ashworth is a false identity. Thomas realized they were dealing with a sophisticated operation. These aren't common criminals. They have resources, professional identities, and enough historical knowledge to conduct convincing research inquiries. Professor Hartwell had been listening to their conversation while continuing his analysis of the documents. There's something else you should know, he interjected. These documents aren't complete. Based on the numbering system and cross-references in the text, there should be at least 3 more parchments in this collection. Dr. Thornton looked up from the genealogical charts. What kind of documents are missing? The most damaging ones, Hartwell replied grimly. What we have here proves Ethelred's cooperation with the Normans and his reward with lands and titles. But the missing documents appear to be detailed records of his intelligence activities, names of Saxon nobles he betrayed, battle plans he revealed, even lists of civilians he identified for Norman execution squads. The implications were staggering. If those documents still existed somewhere, they would contain evidence of specific war crimes that would make the current revelations seem mild by comparison. Collins was thinking like a detective again. If Heritage Investigations was looking for these documents, they might already have the missing pieces. Our break-in could have been an attempt to find the final components needed to complete their collection. Thomas had a chilling thought. Or maybe they were trying to plant the missing documents in the prince's study to make it look like the royal family was hiding evidence of their ancestors' war crimes. The room fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. A false flag operation designed to create maximum scandal and political damage would be devastating to the monarchy, regardless of the truth behind the planted evidence. Dr. Thornton gathered the authenticated documents carefully. We need to decide how to proceed. Do we report this to the government? Try to track down the missing documents? Go public with what we've discovered? Collins shook her head. First, we need to ensure these documents are secure. If there are people willing to break into Kensington Palace to get them, we're all in potential danger. As if summoned by her words, Collins's phone rang. The caller ID showed her supervisor at Scotland Yard. She answered immediately, and Thomas watched her face grow pale as she listened. When? She asked tersely. Are there any witnesses? After she hung up, Collins turned to face them with obvious concern. Dr. Margaret Thornton's office at the palace was broken into last night. Her files were ransacked, and her computer was stolen. Dr. Thornton stood up abruptly. My research notes. All my work on royal genealogy, historical records, everything. It gets worse, Collins continued. The break-in happened at the same time someone attempted to access Professor Hartwell's university laboratory. Campus security interrupted the attempt, but the intruders escaped. Professor Hartwell checked his equipment frantically. Nothing appears to be damaged or stolen here, but they would have seen our preliminary analysis if they had succeeded in breaking in. Thomas realized they were being systematically targeted. They know who we are, what we've discovered, and they're trying to steal or destroy all evidence of our investigation. Collins was already planning their next moves. We need to get these documents to a secure government facility immediately. The National Archives has vault storage that even professional intelligence operatives couldn't penetrate. But Dr. Thornton raised an important objection. Once we turn these over to the government, we lose all control over what happens to them. They could be classified indefinitely, destroyed, or used for political purposes we never intended. Thomas found himself in the strange position of having to choose between his loyalty to the crown and his duty to historical truth. Everything he had been trained to do as a royal protection officer told him to secure the evidence and report through official channels. But his conscience told him that the truth, however damaging, deserved to see daylight. Professor Hartwell made the decision for all of them. I'm creating detailed photographic records and digital scans of everything. Whatever we decide to do with the originals, copies of these documents will survive in multiple secure locations. As he worked to document their discovery, Thomas realized that his quiet life as a palace guard was over forever. Whether they chose to reveal the truth or help bury it, he would always know that the institution he had devoted his career to protecting was built on a foundation of betrayal and blood. The ancient key that had started this entire investigation sat on the laboratory table, its Celtic symbols seeming to mock the modern world's attempts to control the secrets it had unlocked. After nearly 1,000 years, Ethelred the Bold's hidden confession was finally seeing daylight. And somewhere in London, dangerous people were planning their next move to ensure it disappeared forever. The question was whether Thomas and his unlikely allies could stay ahead of their pursuers long enough to decide the fate of the British monarchy and survive the consequences of their choice. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical London weather that matched Thomas's unsettled mood. He had barely slept, his mind spinning with questions about the mysterious key and its connection to the palace break-in. Over breakfast, he studied the photographs he had taken of the 1847 journal entry, comparing every detail of the sketched symbols with his memory of the real key. Detective Inspector Collins had arranged to meet him at 8 o'clock to discuss their next steps. As Thomas walked through the palace gates, he noticed increased security measures already in place. Additional guards patrolled the grounds, and every visitor was being subjected to more thorough screening procedures. Collins was waiting in the security office, her laptop open and surrounded by case files. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. Her usually neat appearance showed signs of a long night spent reviewing evidence and making phone calls to various government departments. Thomas, I've been thinking about your discovery all night, she began without preamble. I've spoken with the palace historian, Dr. Margaret Thornton. She's agreed to meet with us this morning to discuss the historical significance of your key. Dr. Thornton arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that looked almost as old as the palace itself. She was a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an encyclopedic knowledge of royal history that had made her invaluable to 3 generations of monarchs. "Show me this key," she said immediately after introductions were made. Collins carefully removed the key from its evidence bag, placing it on the conference table under bright lights. Dr. Thornton put on cotton gloves and examined it closely with a magnifying glass, turning it over repeatedly and studying each symbol with intense concentration. "Remarkable," she murmured after several minutes. "These symbols are definitely Celtic, pre-Christian era. They're protection runes, used to ward off evil spirits and preserve sacred objects. This key is far older than the palace itself." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "How much older?" Dr. Thornton set down her magnifying glass and looked at him seriously. "Conservative estimate? 8th or 9th century. This key predates the Norman conquest. It belonged to the Saxon nobility who once held this land." Collins leaned forward. "So what would it open? What kind of lock has survived that long?" "That's the fascinating question," Dr. Thornton replied. "Saxon nobles were known for creating elaborate hiding places for their most precious possessions. Not just gold or jewels, but documents that could threaten their enemies or protect their descendants." She opened her briefcase and withdrew several thick volumes of historical records. "I spent most of the night researching this. The land where Kensington Palace now stands was once part of a Saxon estate belonging to a nobleman named Ethelred the Bold. He was a powerful lord who survived the Norman invasion by switching sides at the crucial moment." Thomas watched as she flipped through pages of old maps and genealogical charts. According to these records, Ethelred built a secret chamber beneath his manor house to hide evidence of his treachery. He feared that future generations might discover his betrayal of the Saxon cause. "And you think this key opens that chamber?" Collins asked. Dr. Thornton nodded slowly. "I believe so. The question is whether the chamber still exists after centuries of construction and renovation. The current palace was built in the 1600s, but the foundations incorporate much older stonework." Thomas felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in his mind. "Dr. Thornton, in that 1847 journal, the guard mentioned finding the key behind a loose brick in the cellar. What if the chamber is still down there, hidden beneath the modern foundations?" "It's entirely possible," Dr. Thornton agreed. "Medieval construction techniques were remarkably durable. Stone chambers built properly could survive centuries underground." Collins was already reaching for her phone. "We need architectural plans of the palace basement levels. If there's a hidden chamber down there, we need to find it before someone else does." The next several hours were spent coordinating with palace maintenance staff and reviewing structural blueprints dating back to the 17th century. Thomas found himself in the unusual position of leading a historical treasure hunt beneath one of Britain's most famous buildings. The palace basement was a maze of service corridors, storage rooms, and utility spaces that few people ever visited. Thomas had been down there occasionally during his 12 years of service, but always with specific purposes and authorized escorts. Today, he carried the ancient key and a powerful flashlight, following Dr. Thornton and Collins deeper into the building's forgotten depths. The original Saxon manor would have been built near a water source, Dr. Thornton explained as they descended stone steps that clearly predated the modern palace. These lower levels show signs of much older construction techniques. Thomas noticed the change in stonework as they went deeper. The neat, precisely cut blocks of the upper levels gave way to rougher, more primitive masonry that spoke of ancient craftsmanship. The air grew colder and carried the musty smell of centuries. In the deepest level they could access, Dr. Thornton used a metal detector borrowed from the palace maintenance department. The device began beeping frantically near a section of wall that looked identical to all the others. "There's definitely metal behind this wall," she announced. "And look at these stones. They're arranged differently than the surrounding structure." Thomas examined the wall carefully with his flashlight. Unlike the mortar used elsewhere in the basement, this section was held together with a different type of binding material that had darkened with age. Several of the stones showed slight gaps around their edges, as if they had been designed to be removed. Collins ran her fingers along the stone joints. "These blocks are definitely loose." "Thomas, Try the key on that metal thing, Dr. Thornton detected. Working together, they managed to pry out 3 large stones, revealing a small iron lock mechanism built into the wall itself. The lock was green with oxidation but still intact after centuries of hiding. Thomas's hands shook slightly as he inserted the ancient key. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with surprising ease, and they heard a deep mechanical rumble from somewhere behind the wall. A section of stone swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into absolute darkness. Incredible, Dr. Thornton whispered. After all these centuries, it still works. Thomas shone his flashlight into the opening, revealing rough stone steps leading downward into what appeared to be a natural cave or excavated chamber. The air that flowed out was stale, but not toxic. Their flashlight flames continued burning normally. Should we call for backup? Thomas asked Collins, his security training warring with his curiosity. Let's see what we're dealing with first, Collins replied. But we stay together, and we document everything. The passage was narrow but manageable for single-file movement. Thomas led the way, his flashlight revealing stone walls carved with more Celtic symbols similar to those on the key. Dr. Thornton photographed everything as they descended, her excitement barely contained. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a circular chamber roughly 20 feet across. Thomas's flashlight beam revealed stone shelves carved into the walls, most of them empty now except for traces of rotted wood and metal fittings. But on the far side of the chamber sat a stone chest, still sealed after centuries of waiting. Dear God, Dr. Thornton breathed. It's intact. The chest was carved from a single block of stone, with iron reinforcements that had survived the passage of time better than anyone had a right to expect. Celtic protection symbols covered its surface, and a smaller lock secured the lid. Thomas tried the key again, and once more it fit perfectly. The chest opened with a grinding sound that echoed through the chamber, and Collins immediately began photographing its contents. Inside were several items wrapped in what had once been expensive cloth, but now crumbled at the slightest touch. Carefully unwrapping the first bundle revealed a collection of parchment documents, miraculously preserved by the dry conditions of the sealed chamber. Dr. Thornton examined the documents with reverent care. These are written in Old English and Latin, she said softly. Legal documents, by the look of them. Land grants, treaties, sworn statements. As she read, her expression grew more and more troubled. Thomas, Detective Collins, I think we've found something extraordinary. These documents appear to be proof that Ethelred the Bold didn't just betray the Saxon cause. He sold information to the Norman invaders that led directly to the deaths of thousands of Saxon nobles. Collins looked up from photographing the scene. Historical war crimes. More than that, Dr. Thornton replied, her voice barely above a whisper. According to these documents, Ethelred was promised that his bloodline would be protected and elevated for his service to William the Conqueror. His descendants were guaranteed positions of power and influence for generations to come. Thomas felt a growing sense of unease. Dr. Thornton, what are you saying? She held up another document, this one bearing official seals and signatures. I'm saying that according to these papers, Ethelred's bloodline was formally incorporated into the Norman nobility. His descendants became part of the founding families of what would eventually become the British aristocracy. The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. You mean some of today's noble families might be descended from a Saxon traitor? Not just any noble families, Dr. Thornton said, her academic composure finally cracking. If these genealogical charts are accurate, Ethelred's bloodline connects directly to several branches of the current royal family tree. Collins stopped photographing and stared at them both. Are you telling me we've found evidence that could call into question the legitimacy of the monarchy itself? Dr. Thornton carefully rewrapped the documents and placed them back in the stone chest. I'm telling you that these papers, if authenticated, could rewrite British history. They suggest that the royal family's claim to the throne is built on treachery and murder going back nearly 1,000 years. Thomas understood now why someone had broken into the palace. Word of the key's existence must have leaked somehow. Someone knew what was hidden down here and desperately wanted to either expose it or ensure it remained buried forever. We need to get these documents to experts for authentication, Collins said. But first, we need to secure this site completely. If the wrong people find out about this discovery, she didn't need to finish the thought. Thomas could imagine the chaos that would result if these revelations became public before they could be properly verified and contextualized. The British government would face a constitutional crisis unlike anything in modern history. As they carefully sealed the chamber and made their way back to the surface, Thomas realized that their investigation had taken on dimensions far beyond a simple break-in. They were now guardians of information that could topple governments and destroy institutions that had stood for centuries. The ancient key felt heavier in his pocket as they emerged into the daylight of the palace basement. What had begun as a routine security matter had become something that threatened the very foundations of the British state. And somewhere out there, the people who had attempted to infiltrate the palace were still free, still dangerous, and now more desperate than ever to silence the witnesses to their failure. Thomas looked at his companions, a dedicated police detective and a brilliant historian, both now burdened with secrets that could change the world. None of them had asked for this responsibility, but they had it nonetheless. The real question was what they would do with it, and whether they could survive the consequences of their discovery long enough to make that choice. Thomas Blackwood had been walking the same corridors of Kensington Palace for 12 years. His polished black boots made soft clicking sounds on the marble floors as he conducted his evening patrol. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 11 times, its deep voice echoing through the empty passages. At 43 years old, Thomas was one of the most trusted guards in the Royal Protection Service. He had an eye for detail that his supervisors valued highly. Nothing escaped his notice, not a picture frame slightly askew, not a window left unlatched, not even a speck of dust on a priceless antique. Tonight felt different somehow. The palace seemed unusually quiet, even for a late evening shift. Princess Catherine was visiting her family in Scotland, and Prince William had accompanied her. The skeleton crew of staff had finished their duties hours ago. Only Thomas and 2 other guards remained on duty, along with the night cleaning crew. Thomas turned down the East Wing corridor, his flashlight beam dancing across oil paintings of long-dead royals. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he walked, creating shadows that shifted with each step. He had walked this route thousands of times, but tonight something made him pause outside the locked door of the prince's private study. The door was slightly open. Thomas frowned. This door was always locked during evening hours. The prince was particular about his private workspace remaining secure. No cleaning staff were authorized to enter without supervision, and the prince himself was hundreds of miles away in Scotland. He pushed the door open slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the radio on his belt. The study was dark except for moonlight streaming through tall windows. Everything appeared normal at first glance. The mahogany desk sat in its usual position, leather chairs arranged neatly around a small coffee table, bookshelves lined with volumes on history and constitutional law. Thomas stepped inside and switched on his flashlight. The beam revealed something that made his blood run cold. Papers were scattered across the prince's desk, not the neat, organized arrangement he was known for. File folders lay open, their contents spilling onto the floor. Someone had been searching through the prince's private documents. Thomas immediately radioed for backup and began examining the scene more carefully. His training kicked in as he documented everything with his phone camera, being careful not to disturb potential evidence. The search had been methodical but hasty. Drawers pulled out, filing cabinets opened, even books removed from shelves. As he moved around the desk, Thomas noticed something glinting under a fallen folder. He used his pen to lift the paper carefully and found a small brass key. It was unlike any key he had seen in the palace before, ornate, old-fashioned, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The key felt warm in his gloved hand, heavier than its size suggested. The symbols were unlike anything he recognized, not English letters or numbers, but something far older. Celtic perhaps, or even older than that. The brass had a greenish patina that spoke of considerable age. Sergeant Morrison arrived within minutes, followed by Detective Inspector Sarah Collins from the Metropolitan Police. Collins was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in high-profile security breaches. She had investigated everything from terrorist threats to art theft, and her reputation for thoroughness was legendary. "What do we have, Thomas?" Morrison asked, his voice low and serious. Thomas showed them the disturbed study and the mysterious key. Collins photographed everything before carefully placing the key in an evidence bag. Her experienced eyes took in every detail of the scene. "This wasn't random," she said after several minutes of examination. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. Look at how they searched, systematic, focused on documents and files, not valuables." Thomas had worked enough security details to know she was right. Several expensive items in the study had been ignored: a gold pin set, a valuable crystal paperweight, even a small painting worth thousands of pounds. The intruder had been after information, not money. "The question is," Collins continued, "did they find what they came for, or were they interrupted?" Thomas thought about the key. Something about it nagged at him. The symbols, the weight, the way it seemed to catch light even in darkness. He had an excellent memory for details, and he was certain he had never seen anything like it in the palace before. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I think we should check if anything is missing. The prince keeps an inventory of important documents in his safe." Collins nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. But we'll need authorization to access that information." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. The private secretary to the prince had to be awakened and consulted. Security protocols required notification of multiple departments. By morning, the study had been thoroughly processed by forensics experts. Thomas remained on duty throughout the investigation, his mind turning over every detail. He had been first on scene, which meant his observations would be crucial to solving the case. But it was the key that continued to trouble him. During a brief break, he approached Detective Collins. "Ma'am, about that key. The symbols on it, they seem familiar somehow. Like I've seen them before, but can't place where." Collins looked up from her notes. "That's interesting, Thomas. Your subconscious might be picking up on something important. Any idea where you might have encountered similar markings?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but it's bothering me. Those symbols aren't random. They mean something specific." As the morning shift arrived and the immediate crisis passed, Thomas found himself thinking about the palace's history. Kensington Palace had been a royal residence for over 300 years. Countless secrets had been kept within its walls, countless documents filed away and forgotten. The key was old, possibly very old. What if it wasn't related to the break-in at all? What if the intruder had been looking for it specifically? That afternoon, Thomas was granted permission to review security footage from the past week. He sat in the monitor room, scanning hours of recorded video for any suspicious activity. The footage showed the usual parade of staff members, visitors, and maintenance workers, all properly credentialed and accounted for. Then, he saw something that made him pause the recording. 3 days earlier, a man in maintenance coveralls had been working in the East Wing corridor. The footage showed him using a key card to access areas that should have been off-limits to maintenance staff. The man kept his head down, avoiding direct camera angles, but Thomas could see enough to know this person didn't belong. The fake maintenance worker had spent considerable time near the prince's study, apparently examining the door frame and lock mechanism. At one point, he appeared to be taking photographs with a hidden camera. Thomas immediately called Detective Collins with his discovery. The fake maintenance worker was their prime suspect, but identifying him would require careful analysis of the limited footage available. "Excellent work, Thomas," Collins said when she arrived to review the footage. "This gives us a timeline and confirms our theory that this was a planned operation." As they studied the video together, Thomas noticed something else. The maintenance worker moved with military precision, his posture, his awareness of surroundings, his efficient use of time. This wasn't a common criminal or opportunistic thief. "This man has professional training," Thomas observed. "Military or intelligence background, I'd guess." Collins agreed. Which raises the question of who sent him and what they were really after. The investigation was expanding beyond a simple break-in. If someone with professional training had targeted the prince's private study specifically, there were serious national security implications to consider. That evening, Thomas returned to his regular duties, but his mind remained focused on the mysterious key and its possible significance. He decided to spend his off-duty time researching the palace's history, looking for any mention of similar symbols or keys. The palace library contained extensive records dating back centuries. Thomas had special access as a senior security officer, allowing him to review documents that were normally restricted. He spent hours reading through old inventories, architectural plans, and historical accounts. Late that night, he found something interesting in a journal written by a palace guard in 1847. The man described finding a curious brass key with ancient markings hidden behind a loose brick in the cellar. The journal writer had shown the key to the palace historian, who believed it might date back to the original construction of the palace. The journal contained a rough sketch of the key, and Thomas felt his heart race as he recognized the symbols. They were identical to the markings on the key found in the prince's study. According to the journal, the palace historian had theorized that the key opened a secret compartment or hidden room somewhere in the building. Such hiding places were common in royal residences, used to conceal important documents or valuables during times of political upheaval. Thomas photographed the journal pages and immediately contacted Detective Collins, despite the late hour. This discovery could change the entire direction of their investigation. "If there's a hidden compartment that key opens," Collins said when he reached her, "then our intruder might not have been stealing something. They might have been trying to hide something instead." The implications were staggering. Someone had broken into the palace not to steal royal secrets, but possibly to conceal evidence of something far more serious. The key might be the only thing standing between them, and a cover-up that could reach the highest levels of government. As Thomas ended the call, he realized his quiet life as a palace guard was about to become anything but routine. Whatever secret that key protected was important enough for someone to risk infiltrating one of the most secure buildings in Britain. He looked out his apartment window at the palace lights in the distance. Somewhere in that ancient building was a secret that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. And Thomas Blackwood, career security officer and guardian of royal secrets, was the only person standing in their way. The next morning would bring new revelations and dangers he couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, he held in his possession the key to a mystery that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. The brass key sat on his kitchen table, its mysterious symbols seeming to glow in the lamplight. Whatever doors it opened, whatever secrets it protected, Thomas knew his life would never be the same after tonight. The clock struck midnight as he finally tried to sleep, but rest would not come easily. Tomorrow, he would begin a journey into the hidden depths of royal history, following a trail that would lead him to discoveries that would challenge everything he thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and the price of keeping secrets.